Good morning, my dear friends. Today we are starting a new set of laws. We are beginning to learn the laws of Tzitzit, or Tzitzis, in the Ashkenazic pronunciation. We're going to be learning all the laws about Tzitzis, and they're very fascinating. I'm sure you've probably heard about the idea of Tzitzit before, but not necessarily do you know all the details and what it's all about. And let's try to get down to the depth of it, and we'll figure out what's going on over here. So the Rambam begins by telling us that there is one mitzvah in the Torah, which is to make tzitzis on the corner of our garments. All right, let's find out what's going on. Tzitzis literally would means like a lock of your head, like lock of hair. So a lock at the corner of your garment, like a tassel or fringe. So what happens is that the corner of our garments, we need to have, if we have 4 corners, we need to put these strings on the corner of them. Interesting mitzvah. The Torah says that if you have a piece of clothing that has 4 corners, you need to hang strings on the corners. All right. Now, according to the basic law of the Torah, there actually isn't an amount of strings that you have to put. There's no specific amount. But we have a tradition all the way back from Moses, exactly how many it is. 8 strings in total on each corner. Now, what do? So we take a strand of wool, and we have... Actually, we'll get to the details in a moment. Now, there's another part of the mitzvah, which is that there should be a blue string as well included in this set of strings. So we have again, according to the Torah, there is no specific amount of strings they need to have, but there should also be included a blue string. Now we take this blue string, and what we do is that we wrap it around the other strings, like a coil around the strings. Now again, there's no specific amount of coils that need to be, but comes out like this. We have 2 details to this mitzvah, that there should be white strings and there should be a blue string. But these are actually, in essence, one mitzvah, but each one of these is not dependent on the other. So if a person only has the white string, that's okay. He can use it and put it onto the tzitzis. If a person only has a blue string and the white strings got cut off, at least if they have a little bit of length, but if the rest of it is a blue, that's okay as well. So when we do the mitzvah, it is, again, as we said, one mitzvah, and this is how we do it. So I'm going to show you what's going on with it. So we have, in general, we have two places where we express this mitzvah. It is either with a big talit, which is a big prayer shawl, which is very large and it wraps your entire body. Or there is the tzitzis, which we wear on day to day, the entire time. And that is a smaller type of tzitzis, which is actually like a body vest. So I'm actually going to show you so you guys can see what this tzitzis looks like. So I'm actually wearing a pair right now, but I'm going to show you a different pair. This is a folded pair of tzitzis. All right, here are the strings, and this is the actual tzitzis. This is what it looks like. Whoopa. And there's a hole in the middle, which goes right over your head. All right. So this is a pair of tzitzis. So it has 4 corners. It's made out of wool, and I'm going to show you how these strings on the edge of this garment work, so you can really know what tzitzis is all about. So what we do is like this. When it comes to the corner of the garment, which is right over here, we're not going to put the tzitzis all the way on the bottom. We're going to go up 3 finger breadths, just like that. And right there is going to be the hole where we will put the strings. So what we do is, and I'm just going to try to have you be able to see it clearly, is there's actually 2 holes. You see that? There's 2 holes because in essence, these strings, there are 8 of them over here. But in reality, there are actually only 4 strings, but they're very long. So you take this string, you take it through the hole, and out again, and poof, 1 string becomes 2 strings, 1/2 on each side. And you do that with 4 strings. So you have 4 long strings going through the hole and ultimately becoming 8 strings. Now, once that happens, you're able to tie them up. But let's see in a moment. Let's speak about the strings for a second. These strings have to be long enough that they should go past the end of the corner of the clothing of the actual garment, and they have to be at least the length of 4 finger breadths. So this is the minimum they're allowed to be. And they can go as long as you want. It can be 3 feet for all that you care. And in essence, the mitzvah is that one of these 8 should be blue. Now we're going to talk about later. Today we don't actually have the blue string. We don't for many, many years, hundreds, thousands of years actually, we don't have the blue strings. But as we said, the mitzvah of the white strings is independent of the blue strings. So we don't actually need the blue strings in order to fulfill the mitzvah. It's obviously better to be able to do it with the blue strings, but if we don't have it, it's okay. So what we do is like this. After we put the strings through, we're going to be doing these coils, as we mentioned briefly. And as you can, and I'll show you a little bit closer, you can actually see the coils going through, and there are knots and coils and knots and coils, and they're called a segment. Each one of these is called a segment of coils. So in the day, back in the temple, when they did have the blue string, so what they did was they would begin with a white string, because since the actual garment is white, so therefore we should start with a coil, 1 coil of a white string, and then continue the rest of the coils with the blue string. At the end, we will again finish off with 1 white coil. And that's how it's supposed to be on all the corners. So all 4 corners would have that. How many coils do we do? Minimum is 7, maximum is 13. So actually what we do is today, the custom is, this is a tradition, we have the first set of coils, so we have 2 knots in the beginning, then we have a set of 7 coils, then we have 2 knots again, then we have a set of 8 coils, then we have 2 knots again, then we have a set of 11 coils, then 2 knots again, then a set of 13 coils, and 2 knots at the end. The idea being, why do we have so many coils? The idea is that we want this part where you have these knots to be approximately 1/3 of the length of the tzitzit. So if you were to do this once and then a second time, it comes out to be 1/3 of the length. So you can actually fold this into 3. The knots are 1/3 of the length of it, because that's, in general, that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's the basic of the idea of tzitzis. Because the Torah says, the verse in the Torah is that if you have a clothing that has 4 corners of it, you should put on tzitzis, these tassels, on the corners of them. So now, we don't usually wear clothing made out of 4 corners. I mean, if you do, you would have to put on tzitzis on them. But since it is such a special commandment, as the Torah says, and we're going to see this later on, the Torah says that this commandment is here in order to remind us of all the commandments that God has given us. So therefore, we should wear tzitzis all the time in order to remind us to keep all the commandments. Now, since it is a mitzvah which is, I'm going a little bit ahead of ourselves over here, but let's let's get back into the details of the tzitzis. The strings have to be made, and they have to be spun in order for the mitzvah of tzitzis. In other words, you can't just go to the store and buy some wool and then say, all right, let's use this for making my strings on the corner of my garment. No. They have to be actually made for the purpose of the commandment of the mitzvah. And it should be from the best wool, and it should be done, it shouldn't be stolen, it shouldn't be being used for idol worship or belonging to a holy purpose to the temple. Someone that bows down to an animal, also, you shouldn't use that wool. It should be done by a Jew, specifically someone who has this commandment, this mitzvah to do it. And so that's the way the mitzvah is done. And the Rambam says a very interesting thing. He says that there is an idea that you have to actually make the tzitzis for the mitzvah for the commandment, for the purpose of the fulfillment of the commandment. And therefore, when you make the tzitzis, they have to be made specifically for this garment. So in other words, I can't say, hey, look, here we have the strings on this garment. Let's cut off this corner. Let's cut it off and then sew it onto another pair that I need to make that corner. Instead of undoing all of this, all these fancy knots over here, and then going and putting it on to tying it back on, I can just sew it on. So he says you're not allowed to do that. Basically, the idea is that tzitzis, it says in the verse, you shall make tzitzis. So because it says you shall actually make them, so therefore it cannot be from something which was previously made. So it has to be actually made specifically on the clothing. Similarly, also, if you have, let's say you have a garment that has 3 corners, not 4 corners. So 3 corners doesn't need to have tzitzis on the corners of them. There is no commandment. If it's 3 corners, you're good. So if it's 3 corners and you say, you know what, let me just get ahead of myself. I'll get these on here. I'll get these strings tied on. And then when I make the 4th corner, I'll make the strings for that one. So he says that's also no good because there was no commandment when you made the first 3 corners, and now once you made the 4th one, it already has the tzitzit, so it's already done from before. So that's no good either. And similarly, if there was something wrong with these strings, and he ties on, makes a new hole, and he ties on a second tassel hanging out. So if he had in mind to nullify the first ones, he doesn't want them and he's going to cut them off, so then it's fine. But if not, then it's no good as well. And what happens if these tzitzis get cut? You go through a doorway, the door slams shut, tzitzis pull off. It happens all the time. I mean, someone's sitting on it and you get up and poof, it gets yanked off. It happens. So what you have to do is you have to sew the hole and then retie the tzitzis from the beginning. If there was even just one thread that was still going through them and keeping it connected, then you're good. And that is the basic of the commandment of tzitzis. So we're just getting into it, just getting the base of it. We're going to be learning over the next couple of days. Very fascinating commandment, which all Jewish men do. We'll talk about the details of this over the next couple of days. So we'll be in touch. Have a very good one, and we'll see you tomorrow.